Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. Tonight we're going to be learning Maseches Yoma, Daf Lamed Aleph, and we're starting about 10 lines from the bottom. Lamed Amid Beis, starting at the words Ravina Amar. Yesterday we saw two brisos that seem to have slightly different opinions about whether or not one is obligated to go to the mikvah as they enter into the Azara, before they enter into the Azara. So here, Ravina is going to offer his own answer as to how to explain this. Ravina Amar Rabbi Yehuda ledivrem derabanan ka'amar lahu. In one brisa, Rabbi Yehuda is saying his own shita. But in another brisa, he's saying the shita that they should hold. In other words, it's two brisas, but one of them he's kind of saying, but you guys for sure hold this, right? So that's what the Gemara suggests here. Ledidi mitzora ein tzarech tefillah. He says the mitzora, according to me, says Rabbi Yehuda, no need. But ledidchu, according to you, and this is what's quoted in one of the Mari Mekomos in the Tanaim above. Oduli easy, you should at least admit to me, Mihas, however, to lo mitzorayin bilvadam kol adam, that you seem to say that everyone should go, not just the mitzorah, but that everyone should go to the mikvah before they get there. The Rabbanan, how would the rabbis respond to this? The rabbis would say, no, mitzorah dayish betuma. A mitzorah, who knows anyways that they have a status of tuma, so they touch things that are tummy all the time. They're not careful about tuma. So this is from the language of mitzvos shanoshim dash ba'akevav, that they're like, whatever, they're like being flippant about tuma because they're tamei anyways. Once you're tamei, you're tamei. But kol adam lo daishe b'tuma. So the Rabbanan push back and they say we only obligate a mitzorah to go to the mikvah, but not kol adam. So that's how Ravina explains the Gemara. And now we're going to see a number of comments from Abaye to Rabbi Yosef. Abaye was a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef. We've seen this probably 40, 50 times in Shas. Rabbi Yosef was the one who lost his memory, and then he would say something, and Abaye says, but Rebbe, at Amris, right, this famous dialogue. So this is the relationship that they have. Here we're not speaking about him being blind or having forgotten his memory, about forgetting his memory. But let's see what the Gemara has to say here either way. 6 lines from the bottom, Lamed Amid Beis. Amar le'abai Rav Yosef, Nema Rabbanon depligi le Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe we should say that within this shita of Ravina, that this shita, the Baal Plugta, who holds the Rabbanon who hold against Rabbi Yehuda, maybe they hold Keben Zoma, that they hold that like Ben Zoma, that the mitzorah has to go to the mikvah midoraisa before they get to the mikdash. So maybe they hold Ben Zoma svir lahu. B'haide katani mitzorah, and the fact that they're highlight that Rabbi Yehuda himself is speaking about a mitzorah is l'diach hakocha Rabbi Yehuda, that to show us that his shita is very divergent and that it's not a din doraisa for the mitzorah to go to the mikvah. Oh, Dilma, Abaye says to his Rebbe, maybe that's really not the case. It's just that shiny mitzorah the daish batuma. Maybe the distinction that Ravina made was a correct distinction, that once a person's tamei, we assume that they're going to touch tuma, and therefore the mitzorah, therefore has to go to the mikvah, but everybody else doesn't. Amar le, the Rebbe answers, the Talmud of Yosef responds, shiny mitzorah the daish batuma. You cannot infer from here that the one who is arguing against Rabbi Yehuda holds like Ben Zoma, that really going to the mikvah is a din d'oraisa. No, here we have a psychology. And the psychology is that once this person is already tamei, so therefore he's more likely to touch tuma. Next question between Abaye and his Rebbe. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Tvila zo. This din of going to the mikvah before one enters into the Beis HaMikdash, top of Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph. Chotzetz or eno chotzetz? Do we have the regular rules of the mikvah as to whether or not there is something separating the body from water? Yes or no? This is a very important question in Lamdus, because what is implied from here, as Rashi highlights, is that in a case where we have a tvila that is derabanan, do we then have a concern of chatzitza, that your skin has to have access to the liquid? That's effectively what the Gemara is asking. It's asking it by specifically our case, but the extrapolation from here to other cases is simple. It seems to imply from here, based on the question, that there may be a chance that if going to the mikvah is derabanan in any particular circumstance, it may then be the case that we don't have to worry about chatzitza. So Amar le, the Gemara rejects this havamina. It's a strange havamina anyways, but the Gemara rejects this havamina and says a famous line in Shas, Amar le, top of Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, kol de tikun rabbanon ke'ein deoraisa tikun. When the Chachamim made dinim derabanan, they were mirrored after dinei deoraisa. L'dugma, Shabbos day, kiddush is derabanan. Friday night, kiddush is deoraisa. But the poskim say, they highlight that the same way we treat Kiddush during the day is the same way we treat Kiddush at night, because kol de tikun rabbana kein deoraisa tikun. So here, even within the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, they're going to the mikvah prior to entering the mikdash space, even though it's only derabanan, we don't change the rules. And yes, chatzitza would apply, because everything that was done midirabanan, called the tikkun rabbanan, kein deoraisa tikkun. 2 lines down, another question of Abaye to his Rebbe. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef, bia b'miktsas shma bia olo. Let's say only part of a person's body is inside the mikdash. Does he have to go to the mikvah for that? So we've been in scenarios like this before where like you're like in the middle of saying a bracha and you reach into the bathroom to turn off the light switch, right? So those kinds of scenarios, that happens to me all the time. And at least I try to pause and catch myself. But is it a halachic issue even? Forget about the fact that our bathrooms are different than other bathrooms because our toilet's flush and there's nothing actually there. But here, let's take it in the holy way. A person is walking by the base of Mikdash and they want to stick one arm in through the threshold of one of the doors of the Mikdash from the Chulin area to the Kadosh area. So do we say that Bia b'Mikdash Shma Bia, although that a partial entrance into the Mikdash, is that considered a Bia? Is that considered an entrance or not? It says the Gemara, Amarle Behonos Yochichu. We know from the thumbs of the Tara process of the Mitzorah that can prove to us exactly what the halacha should be, because part of their body is in the Mikdash. Shehein Bia b'Mikdash. That's a partial entrance into that holy space. And what do we see? Vitanya, the Brisa writes, Lamed Aleph Amar Aleph, 5 lines down, Vitanya Mitzorah Tovel Ve'omi B'Shar Nikanor. And we see that what does the Mitzorah have to do? He has to be Tovel. He's not entering his whole body into the Mikdash. You're absolutely right. He's not entering his whole body into the Mikdash. But the reason why he has to be Tovel is because it's a Bia b'Mikdash. And Bia b'Mikdash is Shema Bia. Even if part of the body is going to be entering into the Beis HaMikdash, one would then be obligated to go to the mikvah. 6, 7 lines down. We learned already, based on a drasha, that a zar, a non-Kohen, is allowed to do shchita. So let's say you get a really long knife and you want to do shchita from standing in the Ezras Yisrael. Now the knife would have to be very long. The mizbech is many, many, many dozens of amos away. It's very far. So would that work? There was a picture of a meme going around of a COVID bris, and the mole was holding a broomstick with a scalpel at the end. So that's the imagery.
Cartoon, right?
It was not a cartoon. It was a joke, but it wasn't a cartoon. It was an actual person holding a broomstick, and at the end was a knife, and then someone was holding a doll. They were pretending to do a bris. COVID, 6 feet apart. It's not funny. Just something that people were setting around. But this is the actual shaila in regards to the shechita knife. He would stand in a space that's full. He would stand in a space that is not holy, but his extension would not be with his hands. It would be with a long knife, a machete, very, very long knife. So what do we say? How do we answer this? So the Gemara says this question needs to be asked in 2 ways. Tiboyle ben Zoma. This needs to be asked according to the shita of Ben Zoma, who holds that going to the mikvah is a din d'oraisa, and Tiboyle Rabbanan de Plige led Rabbi Yehuda. It also needs to be asked according to the dissenting opinion, the one that argues against Rabbi Yehuda. Tibayla ben Zoma, 1/3 of the way down Lamed Aleph Amar Aleph. The question is for Ben Zoma as follows. Maybe we would say, Ad Kan, Lo Mechayev Ben Zoma Elo Legavoy. Maybe the only time that Ben Zoma holds that there's a din d'oraisa to go to the mikvah is when you're actually entering inside. However, Aval Levroi, but if you're only standing outside, as you are in this case, holding a very long blade to do the shechita, lo, there he would not say that you need to go to the mikvah. There's no din d'oraisa because it's only legavai. The only time that he would hold that there's a mitzvah to go to the mikvah is if you're going into the room. That's one possibility. O Dilma, or perhaps maybe Ben Zoma would have said in such a scenario that asi le'im shuche, that maybe we're afraid that you would end up being drawn into the room, right? That's a possibility, and because of that, we don't know the answer yet. This is all the question phase. And the question of our very long knife for shechita was asked now according to Ben Zoma. Now let's flip over to one of his counterparts. Tibai, the question should also be asked according to the opinion, the Rabbanan de Plige led Rabbi Yehuda, the dissenting opinion that argues against Rabbi Yehuda. And what would be the question within the frame of their shita? Ad kan lo ka'amre Rabbanan hasam, this opinion that argues with Rabbi Yehuda, and there maybe he's only lenient to lo ka'avid avoda. Maybe it's only lenient because he's not doing any part of the avoda, and that's why he was lenient. However, aval hacha to ka'avid avoda lo, but here because he's doing the shechita, maybe we should say that we should not be lenient, and he should go to the mikvah because he's doing the avoda now, or perhaps it should not make a difference. So 2 different languages two different pathways to understand the question. One according to Ben Zoma, and one according to the Rabbanan who argue with Rabbi Yehuda. And in both cases, the Gemara says, we don't know the answer to that question. So it's interesting. There's a lot of applications like that. Let's say you're supposed to be in a shul for a minyan. What does that mean? Can I put one arm in, right? What is considered to be in the room? So seemingly one arm is considered to be in the room. If we look at this Gemara about the Mitzorah, it seems to be that way. But if you're outside the room and you're just listening, so maybe that doesn't count. Okay. Halfway down, Lamed Aleph at the 2 dots. We learned in our Mishnah, Chamesh Tevilos V'Asar Kiddushin Tovel. We said that in our Mishnah that the Kohen Gadol will do 5 tevilos on the day of Yom Kippur, and he'll do Asar Kiddushin, and he'll also do 10 Kiddushin of Yadayim v'Raglayim. 10 times he'll wash his hands. So this is not so pashut. We'll see in the Gemara, this is not so simple. But right here, we have a logistical sugya to discuss first about how tall this mikvah was off the ground that he went to. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught us. Rabbis taught us as follows: Chamesh tefillas v'asar kiddushin tovel kohen gadol mekadosh bo b'yom. This we know. All right, we quoted from our Mishnah. He'll go to the mikvah 5 times, and he'll have to do 10 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and he'll go to the mikvah that day. The kulim b'kodesh b'beis haparva. All of this was done in a holy section of the Beis Hamikdash, in a room called the Beis HaParva, chutz merishona shayse b'chol, except for the first time that he'd go to the mikvah, which was outside of the holy space. This was the din that we've been speaking about for the last blot. And that was b'chol al gabe shar hamayim u'vitzad lishkaso haisa. That was next to the shar hamayim. It was next to a room, next to a doorway called shar hamayim, and it was next to the lishka where the Kohen Gadol lived. So Amar Abaye looks at this source in the Tanaim. He looks at this brisa and he says as follows: 2/3 of the way down on Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, he says, Amar Abaye Shma Mina. What can I learn from here? Well, we know that the mikvah was on the 2nd floor, and we know that it was sourced by something called Ein Eitan, the spring of Eitam. So says the Gemara, Ein Eitam, the flow of the water that would lead into this mikvah must have been Gavoa Mikarka Azara, Esrim V'Shalosh Amos. It must be that the Ein Eitam was at least 23 amos off of the ground. Urechava amos, right? It's not. How do we know? Because the Mishnah writes, Kol Apsachim Sham Govhan Esrim Ama. We know, of course, that the average doorway in the Beis Hamikdash was 20 amos tall by 10 amos wide, with one exception of the ulam, which had doubled those dimensions of 40 amos tall doorway by 20 wide. But the doorways that we're talking about here were 20 tall. And we also know, the pasuk writes, Vitanya, the Brisa writes, that we know the minimum square amma, cubic amma of a mikvah. We remember it's 1 by 1 by 3. We've seen this before. Vitanya, the Brisa writes, V'rachatz b'tzarova mayim b'mei mikvah. He has to be in mikvah water. What does kol b'tzaro mean? Mayim shekol gufa ole b'hem. It has to be a mikvah that's big enough to consume the volume of the person. V'kamahein, what is the cubic amma of this space? Amma al amma berum gimel amos. So 3 cubic amos is the amount of space which a person can fit into. So if what you're saying is that this mikvah is on the 2nd floor, and if what you're saying is that the minimum cubic amos is 1 by 1 by 3, length, width, and height. So that means the height is 3. The doorway is 20. So that means the 2nd floor has to start at least at 20 amos. So it's 20 amos off the ground, plus another 3 for the depth of the human being. So that means that the height of Ein Eitam must have been at least 23 amos off the ground, because that's to fill the mikvah. Right? They're not using a pump system. We're just assuming this is gravity, and therefore Ein Eitam must be 23 amos off the ground. And that brings us to the top of Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, that can't be right. You can't say that it's 23 amos tall. It has to be more. The Ha'ika Amma Tikra, there's still space above the doorway before we get to the 2nd floor, and as well the Amma Ma'aziva. And as well, there was some space to build out the bottom of the mikvah. Mikvah has to be waterproof. It has to be able to hold water. So they had to build something. It couldn't be exactly 23 amos. It had to be higher than that. So maybe it should be a little bit higher. Says the Gemara, Sha'arim de Beis Hamikdash kevan de shisha ninhu. Since they were made out of shayish, they were made out of marble. Marble is a very thin rock and relatively strong. B'mashu avdeluhu. It wasn't much more than 23. It was 23 and a mashu. So says the Gemara, okay, then talk about the mashu. Why are you ignoring it? It's not 23. Ein Eitam had to be above 23 amos. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. But kevon de lo havoy amsa lo chashiv la. Since it wasn't in fact a full amma, we're going to basically ignore it. We're just going to say it's 23. But really, you're right. You're correct. The Ein Eitam, the water flow from this spring, was at least 23 plus amos off of the ground with a mashu. 4 lines down, the Gemara Lamed Aleph Amud Beis said, Parsu Sadin Shel Boots. We said that there was a screen put up for tznius. The Meiri writes, and yesterday's daf, the Meiri writes that this screen was put up for tznius as the Kohen Gadol would be changing his garments. So they put up this this sheet. I'm just thinking like a clothesline type of thing. You pin it up in a few places, and there's this sheet of linen. So it says the Gemara Sadin Shel Boots. My shna Shel Boots. Who cares about the material? If the Meiri is right, and all we're talking about is l'tzniusa, we're just talking about modesty, so people shouldn't see him undressed. There's a din like that if your Rebbe's in the mikvah, you're not supposed to see your Rebbe in the mikvah. So I see here in Chicago all the time, fathers and sons are there. I presume that there's a mechilas couple there. I don't know exactly what the halachic mechanics are, but with a rebbe, you're not supposed to see them undressed. So therefore, says the Gemara, Maishna shel boots.
The father shouldn't see his
What?
son should not see his father undressed.
I'm wondering if there's mechilas kavod, if because
Depends on what age, right?
No, I don't think so. I'm just wondering if a father can say I'm mochel on my kavod. You can call me Phil. Like how does that work? Like a melech is not allowed to be mochel on his kavod. So how does it work with a father? I don't know. I'm just I'm talking out loud. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So ask the Gemara, Ma'ishna shel boots. Why were you being specific with the material? If the whole goal of the material is to separate the coin from everybody else so that no one sees anything, no one sees him changing, who cares that it's made out of linen? So it says the Gemara, Kedamar of Kahana elsewhere, Kadesh Yakir Shavod Asiyam Big Day Boots, so that he would remember that this is Yom Kippur. This is the day of wearing linen. There were times when all he wore was linen garments and none of the golden begadim of the Kohen Gadol. So it's obviously a very unique day. So the linen was more of a trigger, of a reminder that it's Yom Kippur than anything else. So Rav Kahana says that din in its own space. We're going to see this a little bit later in the Masechta. But Hachanami, we would apply the same rule here, that Sheyakir Shavod Hasem with big day boots, to remind him that today is a special day. Sometimes we're going to be wearing boots, we're going to be wearing linen. That brings us to a new Mishnah at the top of Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, about 7-8 lines down. So getting into more detail about the Avodas Hayom. The Kohen Gadol would go through the following process. Pashat, he would remove his regular clothes. Yorad v'tabal, he would go down into the mikvah. Alav and istapag, and he would come out of the mikvah and he would dry himself off. So some of the Meforshim highlight, why does the Mishnah have to say that he came out of the mikvah? Well, he's going to live there forever. Of course he's going to come out of the mikvah. So some of the Meforshim say that the tahara process doesn't kick in until you're out of the water. Just dunking isn't sufficient. You have to get out of the water. That's why the Mishnah was dafka to add the words ve'ala. But if that's true, then what's v'nistapag? You have to dry yourself off too. So that's a shaila on the poskim by netilas yadayim. Let's say you wash netilas yadayim for bread, and you want to make the bracha, but your hands are totally dried. Are you too late? Are you not too late? So these are all shilas that come up. But the language here is pretty particular, and it implies that it is not being in the water alone that makes a person tahor. There is the exiting from the water as well. So he would pashat, he would remove his clothes, he would go down into the mikvah, he would be tovel, he would come out, he'd dry himself off. They would bring him the golden clothing, and he would put them on. And then at that point, here's our first one: v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. He already went to the mikvah, and he's gone to the mikvah now twice, right when he got there, and now he's gone to the mikvah a second time, and now he's done the first round of kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Then heviulo esat tamid. Then they bring the Kohen Gadol. They bring him to the Korban Tamid. Kartsu, he would make the first incision, but he wouldn't complete the Shechita because the Kohen Gadol was also going to do the Kabbalah on the Zrika. He was also going to be receiving the blood in the pitcher, and then he was going to be doing the Zrika on the Mizbeach. So if you're cutting, it's very hard to do both. So he started the cut, and then says the Gemara, Mirek Acher, Shechita al Yado, then another person actually completed the Shechita while he did the following, Kibel Sadam Zarko. So then he received the blood properly from the cut itself, and then he did the Zrika Sadam. What was that, Michael?
Kind of tricky.
This is very nuanced. Yeah, it's very nuanced. And how much did he have to cut? It doesn't even say in the cut. It's a baton. Yeah. It's a baton. And these, how big were these knives? It was a quick switch. It's also, it's certainly mutter, but I would like, one of the things that people talk about shechita, that we have ritual slaughter, is that it's one of the fastest ways for an animal to be killed and one of the least painful ways. The knives are so sharp that it's probably not as painful as one would have thought, and they're unconscious within 2 seconds. So I've been told. So I've been told by people who are involved in the shechita world, that the animals are aware of pain for 2 seconds. I don't know. That's what they said. But either way, here they did a little bit of a cut, another person took over, and then the Kohen Gadol did the Kabbalah Sadam, and then did the Zrika Sadam. And then the next step, Nichnas lahaktir Ktores shel shachar laheti v'saneros. Then he'd go into the Heichal, and he would be maktir the Ktores. Remember, we saw the discussion by the Tzdukim and the Prushim, whether or not you put the Ktores on the coals and the shovel outside the Heichal and bring it in, so that you're going with smoke, or inside. We pask in Medina that it has to be inside the Heichal. You bring the coals inside, and then you put the Ktores on top of it. So nichnas lahaktir Ktores shel shachar laheti v'saneros, and he'd also clean out the candles. Ulahakir v'tarosh v'soivarim. He'd also then be makar of the head of the animal and the rest of the limbs, v'chavitin v'sayayin, all the flowers and all of the wines, and then the Mishnah pivots a little bit and says Ktores shel shachar haisa kreva bein dam le'evarim. The Ktores shel shachar When was it done in the process of the mourning? It was done Bein dam le'evarim, between the zrikas hadam and the burning of the evarim, as was indicated in the early parts of our Mishnah. However, shal bein ha'arbaim, it was a little different. It was bein evarim le'nesachin. The afternoon was a little bit different. And then the Gemara goes back to, doesn't go back to, then the Gemara goes to a total side note. If he was an older person, or if he was an istanis, he was very sensitive about the temperatures of the water, then they're allowed to warm up hot water and put it into the mikvah to just kind of take the chill out of the water. That's considered mutter. The mikvah we have here, you go on Pratt, there's a hot mikvah and then there's a warm mikvah, but there's not a cold mikvah where a whole bunch of istanis. I mean, I've been to the Arizal's mikvah. That is some cold water. So that's some serious, but it's fresh, but you know what? It's really cold. So yeah, very cold.
It's not colder than 32 degrees.
No, it's flowing. It's hard to tell, but it's pretty close. It feels like it. You can't breathe. It's like overwhelming. Either way, this Kohen was allowed to have the water, just a little bit warmed up. Middle of the page, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, one more sugya for the night. This will bring us to the top of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, and then we'll stop. Says the Gemara, Amruha Rabbanan Kame de Rav Papa, Ha Delo Ki Rav Meir. Our Mishnah cannot be like the opinion of Rav Meir. This is what the rabbis said to Rav Papa. We'll soon see his retort. But this was what they were putting forward, that our Mishnah cannot be like Rav Meir. The Rav Meir, if our Mishnah was like Rav Meir, Kevan de Amar Trey Kiddushe Alavisha Avilahu, he holds that there's more Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim than our Mishnah, because here he holds that there's two Kiddushim Yadayim V'Raglayim Alavisha Avilahu, and therefore Hachanami, he holds that elsewhere, but the halacha would apply here too. Le'avi Trey Kiddush Alavisha. Then when he first gets dressed in the beginning of our Mishnah, what does our Mishnah say? Ours just says very simply that Pashad Yarad V'Taval Olav V'Gstapag, and then after he's dressed, then Kiddush Yada Baragla, but he has two there, so that means it can't be like our Mishnah. So it says Rav Papa, you guys are incorrect. Amar Lahu, Rav Papa, they said no. Bein l'Rabbanan, bein l'Rav Meir, chad pshita de bigdei kodesh v'chad alavisha. One, they both agree that one is on the removal of the clothing of the bigdei kodesh, and one is on the lavisha, on the putting on of the new set of garments. So if that's true, then what's the machlokas? This is what the argument is. It's based on how we understand the psukim. Upashat v'rachatz v'lavash. So Rav Meir savar makish pshita l'lavisha. Rav Meir says there is what to be equated between the world of pshita, removing clothing, and lavisha, of putting on clothing. How does he understand this juxtaposition of words in the pasuk? He says as follows, 2/3 of the way down, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. Ma lavisha, just like when getting dressed, lovesh v'achar kach mekadesh, just like after getting dressed, one does kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, he's dressed, v'achar kach mekadesh. So, says Rav Meir, af pshita, even the removal of clothes, poshet v'achar kach mekadesh. But the rabbis don't agree with that. The rabbis look at the same words but have a different drasha. V'rabbanan sabre, I agree to what you're equating. Sabre makish pshita l'lavisha. I agree that these two things need to be compared. They need to be put on the same playing field. But I don't agree with how you made your comparison. How do the Rabbanan see this juxtaposition of words? Says the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom. Malavisha kshehu lavush mekadesh. Just like when clothing, when do we do the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? Once you're fully dressed. Af pshita, then even when you are disrobing, kshehu lavush mekadesh. You have to wait till you put the clothes back on. So there's a machlokas of Meir and the Rabbanan. Do we have kiddush yadayim v'raglayim in regards to pshita? So Amrulei Rabbanan the Rav Papa Umimot Samar Sachi. They said back to Rav Papa, that can't be. What you're saying in the name of Rav Meir can't be. You're saying that according to Rav Meir, that he has to do a kiddush yadayim v'raglayim after removing clothes, and another kiddush yadayim v'raglayim after putting on clothes. So it says the Gemara V'Hatanya, the Brisa writes as follows. We know, of course, Parsu Sadin Shel Boots Beino Lebein Ha'am. They would put up a sheet, and we said before for tznius, and as well it was boots to remind him of Yom Kippur. And then Pashad v'Yard v'Taval Olav Nistapag. And then Heviu lo big day zahav lavash v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. That's the shita that we saw above. That's basically our Mishnah. However, in this brisa, we have an added shita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir Omer, follow along. Pashat v'kidesh yadav v'raglav v'yorad v'tavala lavanistapag. Heviu lo big day zahav lavash v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. So that's definitely not like our Mishnah, because this Mishnah is explicit, black on white, that this Mishnah is a machlokes to the Tanakama. So it doesn't work at all. Amar Lahu, Tanya. Wow, okay, you've got a brisa. What can I do? Rav Papa was shut down. You've got a brisa. You win this conversation. Says the Gemara, but I still don't understand. Bishlama Rav Meir. I understand the Rav Meir because according to Rav Meir, every time he changes his clothes, he does two kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Raglayim is not a word. So he said he does two, one by the Pshita, one by the Levisha. And that's how we get to the number 10. Remember, our Mishnah said that he did 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. That's how you get to 10. You're doing 5 dippings. Every time you take off your clothes, you do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Every time you get dressed again, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. That's 2. 5 changes. 5 times 2 is 10. Perfect. But if you don't say that by the first Pshita, the first time he removes his clothes, that he's going to go to the mikveh, you're only left with 9. But our Mishnah says 10. It says the Gemara, you're right, that's correct. They still argue on that first pshita, on the first time he disrobes. Amrei lach rabbanan, what they would say is kiddusha basra. There is one extra kiddush adayim v'raglayim at the end. Kipashit big day kodesh, lavish big day chol. After the whole avoda, he's done now, and now he's putting on weekday clothes. He's putting on his regular suit, tie, whatever he would wear. Under those circumstances, Avi lehasam, he'd add in his 10th one right there, and therefore, even according to the Rabbanan, who do not say that by the first time he's poshet begadav that he has to go to that he has to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and therefore it sounds like he'd only have 9 occurrences of kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Says the Gemara, once he's fully dressed again, after all of the avodas, he'll do one extra one, which Rav Meir clearly wouldn't agree to because then it would be 11. So therefore, the Rabbanan say we get to the number 10 by after being fully dressed in big day chol of Hasam, he would do the extra kiddush yadayim v'raglayim there. Wishing you all a beautiful